Hey, it's Jim Bergman on behalf of Accutools. One of the questions we get a lot of times is, I'm pulling down my system and I just can't, it won't come down, it's stalling out. And guys are typically dealing with moisture. So I want to do a little bit of a video here and show you the impacts of moisture and how we remove moisture from a system. Right now, if you take a look at this, I've got this system down to about 132 microns or so. I'm going to go ahead and isolate it here, and we'll just take a look at our decay rate for just a second here. So let me scroll through here. So our vacuum rate, we're running about 1 micron a minute, 2 microns a minute to rise, and we'll just let that stabilize here and see where that's at. We pulled it down a couple times. I wanted to get it really nice and dry on here. We know the system's good and dry now, and again, we're down about 130 microns, and we have a pretty low rate, and it's actually tailing off down. We're down to about 7 minutes of rise per minute. If you let that stabilize long enough, eventually it'll get down to 1 micron a minute or less. That's where we want to be ultimately. If you're using a BlueVac professional gauge, it'll calculate that it's going to hit that for you, so you don't have to go through that full decay test. So what I'm going to do here is, I'm going to kill my pump for just a minute, just to get rid of the noise here. And this one's got a check valve in it, so we really don't have to break the vacuum on it. What I've got here is I put a sight glass on the coil here, and you can see there's a small amount of oil in the bottom of this thing. I'm going to go ahead and break the vacuum on this coil. I'm going to pull the Schrader core out of the coil, and we're going to lose our vacuum. We're at 134 right now. And I'm going to do the unthinkable for a lot of you guys, which is introduce water into the system. So I'm going to pull this core out here. We'll let that vacuum break. It's going to take a few seconds for it to break. And then what I got here is a couple of milliliters of water, tap water. I'm going to go ahead and put this right into the system here and add it into that sight glass. So we'll see that go in there. Waffle, settle down. All right, so you can see there I've got about half a sight glass full of water, and I'm going to go ahead and put that Schrader core back in, and we'll go ahead and start this up again. So now I've got a system that's got a lot of water in there. Now I want you to notice a couple different things here. Number one is when we start pulling on the system, what's going to happen right away is we're going to see that water start to boil, because the pressure will drop on the system, right? The pressure is going to drop, but the water is going to sit in the sight glass. It doesn't get pulled by the vacuum pump. The only way a vacuum pump can remove water is if the water changes state. Now I got this also in a sight glass here so we can see what happens. Maybe we'll get some ice, maybe we won't. It's a little warm in here today, but in order to get ice in a system, you have to have standing water. If you just have water vapor, the water vapor will not actually crystallize or anything like that. You'll pull the water vapor out really quickly, but now we have a system with a couple of milliliters of standing water. So let's watch and see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the pump. We'll give this thing a, in fact, let me do this here. I'm going to restart my recording so I'm fresh. So I got I'm starting to graph now. Turn on my vacuum pump, and then we'll very carefully here, we'll let this get up to speed here. And we'll go ahead and we'll open this up here. We got that develop a vacuum. Okay, so you can see right away now I'm opened up. And you can start to see that water level is starting to drop a tiny bit in there, and we're starting to boil in there because our water now is getting to the point where we're dropping the pressure low enough that we're below the boiling point. So the water in the sight glass, this is a lot of water in there, is actually boiling off pretty quickly here, and I think what you're seeing in the bottom now is that starting to settle or starting to slow down, and if we look real closely in there, we might get a little bit of ice in the bottom of that sight glass here. And if we look at our graph here, we're pulling down, but we're only like down to 8,000 microns. It's not that quick pull down that we typically see, and as soon as that water doesn't bubble anymore, we might have ice. The sight glass here is cool to the touch, but you can still boiling away, so we're just removing that moisture out of there. So it's going to take a few minutes now, and this is what frustrates guys more than anything. There is nothing you can do except add heat if you know where the moisture's at. In this case, I know it's in the sight glass here, so I could add heat to it, but I'm not going to do that right now. Or wait. Water takes a tremendous amount of time to actually be removed from the system, and it's a vicious cycle. And it's a vicious cycle because what happens is that water gets colder and colder. And when it gets colder and colder, that means that its vapor pressure drops down and its specific volume increases exponentially. So now we're talking about literally hundreds of cubic feet of water vapor that are in this system, because as we drop the temperature and we drop the pressure, we change the water to a vapor. It's going to take now a tremendous amount of time. Now if you look at my, come over here and take a look at my tablet here for just a second. This is a key indicator that we have water on the system. And that water is literally flatlining this graph right now. So we're at 2,000 microns. If you look over here, we're on the wet side of the system here. We pulled that down and now it's flatlined here. And the reason it's flatlined, this is again a watch pot never boils. So we're changing state of that water. We're changing it from a liquid to a gas. And until we get that water out of the system, it absolutely will not stop that boiling. And in this case here, that's what that flat line is. So when you see it pull down like this and flatline, this is a good indication that we have, in fact, it's an excellent indication we have moisture, and we know we have moisture, but now you can see that in there. This water in here is pretty stable, steady right now, but we're still pulling a little bit away, and we'll just have to give it some time here, and we'll come back in a few minutes and I'll show you our progress. All right, so one of the things I want to show you here is, we know the system's obviously wet. We're stalled at that 2,000 micron range here. Part of the reason I use a bigger pump on here is just because it's got a larger oil reservoir. But on top of the pump, there's a gas ballast. Right now I have that gas ballast closed. I'm going to go ahead and turn that gas ballast to open. And opening up the gas ballast, what it's going to do is it's going to inject some air into the secondary part of the pump, and it's going to help to dry out that oil. And you can see in here, the oil doesn't look very wet in here at all. It's not milky or cream colored in here. The oil is actually in pretty good shape still. We're going to go ahead and run that pump, let it go ahead and open the ballast up until we get the moisture out of the system. Then we'll go ahead and close it back down and let it get to our ultimate evacuation. So one of the things that happens when we're changing state of water is the water gets colder and colder. And I just wanted to show you this here because the outside of the sight glass is actually sweating because it's dropped in temperature so much. So when you have an area of a system, if you run your hands along it and you feel that that area is cold, that's a good indicator that that's where our moisture is at in the system. And if we hold on to that or we add heat to that system, we're going to evaporate that moisture out even faster. This is probably a good several degrees below ambient temperature. Don't forget I have water in these stems too. I put quite a bit of water in that system. So until we get all that moisture out of there, it's just not going to change in vacuum. So we're about, let's see here, we are 26 minutes in, and we're still pretty stalled there. But I did take and added just a small amount of heat. I'll show you what I did here. I took a torch here and just sort of warmed this up a little bit just to get that boil a little faster and boil some of that moisture out of there. We actually did have a little bit of ice, and as soon as I did that, it actually warmed it up and got it boiling again there. And again, if we know where the moisture's at and we can heat that up any, it's going to help, because remember, the vacuum pump doesn't pull the moisture away from the system. It just decreases pressure, and it's got to change state before we can get rid of it. So it's either going through sublimation or evaporation. Evaporation is obviously a lot faster if we can get it to evaporate out of there. And so just add that little bit of heat to this, and this is probably over 100 degrees right now, is making that water boil again, and that's why we saw a small increase of pressure on our on the vacuum gauge as it's running. Okay, so we've been on the vacuum pump now for about 35 minutes, and just a small amount of water on there. And you can see here, we stalled out around 2,000 microns, and then it hit this point right here. It dropped down from about 1,800. All of a sudden, it just took a little dip to around 1,200 microns. And I believe what happened there is actually we turned to ice. Even though it's 80 degrees out here, that little bit of water finally got cold enough that it turned to ice. So I did take the torch for a second because Brian Orr's annoying the heck out of me to get going for a podcast. And I heated it up, and you can see it did raise the vapor pressure up. And I showed you that a little earlier in the video. And now we're down here. We're coming down to about 500 microns or so. We're down at, let's see, 447 microns, and we're still coming down very, very slowly. So what you have to understand is as soon as you introduce moisture into the system, it's going to slow everything way, way, way down. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You've seen me pull this coil down before. I can literally pull it down in about 9 minutes to 100 microns when everything's nice and dry. Here we are, 30 some minutes into the testing, and we're only at 400 microns. And I have a pump that's actually designed to handle moisture. I had the ballast open until we got down to about 1,000 microns, 1,200 microns, then I shut it off because we're pretty much have the moisture out of the oil, and I'm just letting it work here. But this is just an example of what it's going to take. I'm going to let it run for a few more minutes, and we'll get it back down to close to where we had it, and we'll see how long it takes overall to get that done. So we're down about 176 microns right now, and I'm going to go ahead. We're about 53 minutes in. So typically, again, this evacuation takes somewhere around 9 minutes, 10 minutes at most, and we're at 53 minutes on the clock right now. Now, if I scroll across here, a couple things again I want you to notice here. 1,800 microns to about 1,100 microns or so when we're having the moisture range. As soon as I got that moisture boiled out, you can see it had a continual drop down as it dried it out. But notice how slow that drop was. It was still really, really slow tracking that down because the moisture is still in that system. So until we get this system like dry, like I might leave it on the pump overnight again, it's still contaminated with moisture. Now the moisture level is so low that it doesn't matter. In other words, the filter dryer would remove the residual moisture because we're down, down below 200 microns here, which is somewhere around a negative 36 saturation temp. So I'm going to go ahead and valve this off for a second here, and we'll go ahead and we'll do our decay test. So I'm going to close this off, and we're going to start the decay test here. And I've got that set for 15 minutes. And we'll see that this is going to climb up rapidly just because I isolated with the core tools, but then it should go up and start to tail off here. So let's look at our leak rate here. We are at a decay rate of about 36 microns per minute, and we should see that dropping. So now it just dropped down to 35, 36. We should see that drop down as the vapor pressure builds up and the system starts to stabilize. And this will tell us what our ultimate moisture level is in the system. So I can't just run this till I hit 200 microns and go, oh, I'm at 200 microns, that's good enough. I've got to make sure that I isolate it, go through a decay test, make sure that I give time for that water vapor pressure to build back up so I can see what my ultimate level of dehydration is. And then again, with a BlueVac Pro, it's going to tell us automatically whether they're going to pass, fail this test, but it still hasn't processed that yet because it still sees a significant amount of rise, and it hasn't determined if it's going to pass or fail. So we'll give this a couple more minutes to see what this does, and then what I want to do is we're going to break this vacuum again, and I'll leave it right on there so you can see what another pull down looks like, the characteristic change, now that we got most of that moisture out of the system. So give this a couple minutes, we'll see where we're at, and then I'll break that vacuum and we'll go from there. All right, so we're down, we're still down. I have this isolated off now. We're down at about, let's see here, 193 microns. Our decay rate is considerably lower than it was the first time around. For the sake of time here, I just want to show you some things here because we're actually about an hour into this video, I believe, if not over an hour and 5 minutes in. So I've got this isolated here, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break the vacuum because I want you to see what's going to happen here and the characteristics, the difference of the pull down now that the system is dried out. So I'm going to go ahead and break the vacuum, pull the core out here. If I can get it out here, it's under vacuum. So I got the core out. You can see the vacuum gauge here is broken. We're up at HP here, so we're above 760,000 microns. So I'll go ahead and push this back in here, and we'll open up the core tools and we'll start again. Now, an hour and 5 minutes before to get this down, but now that we have this dry, the characteristic of the vacuum is going to change considerably. So you hear the atmosphere hogging out of here pretty quickly. And if you come over here and we look at the iPad here, we'll give this just a second here. You can see, again, we're going to have this fast pull down, and before it stopped here at, as it was coming down, let me see if I can get this done here. About 2,000 microns just started to level off right there, right? So we saw that big level off at 2,000. Then this whole time here, this is all dehydration. So we're isolated it, pulled it back down, was doing a second test on there. Well, let's see where we're down to now. We're crossing about 2,700 microns, which is right where we stalled before. And we should zip right on past this now because the system is nice and dry. And we're gonna pull right past that. Obviously, you can see we're down to 18, 17, 1,600 microns. And what's happening here is when the system doesn't have the moisture to deal with, we got it nice and dry, it's gonna have that quick pull down. So again, keep that moisture out of your system. You never wanna get any water in there because that's what's gonna really take a lot of time. Once that system's been started, like if somebody didn't do an evacuation and just cut the gas in and blow and go, it's just gonna take you forever to get that moisture out of there. And I've had this happen before on jobs where it just takes time and time and time. There's nothing you can do about it. But once you get that moisture out and once you get it dry, it'll do a real fast evacuation again. So again, purge nitrogen through as you're doing your brazing. That keeps the moisture from the air from getting absorbed into the copper. You can see we're down to 700 microns already on this system. It's just been a couple of minutes here, but it's got a whole different characteristic when it's dry than when it's wet. So if you want these really quick, fast pull downs that I've showed you time and time again, you've got to make sure your system is dry when you start. And if you hit moisture, there's not much you can do except wait, fill the line set, and see if you can fill any areas that are cold. And if they're cold, apply some heat. That'll help boil off that moisture a little bit faster. But that's about it to go. We're going to let this run until we get down to, let's say, 200 microns again, just so we can see that. We're at 485 microns here in less than a couple of minutes. But that's the difference out there, is making sure that when we pull these systems down, that we're getting the vacuum done as quickly as possible, and a dry system is what's going to allow that to happen.